Welcome back to more of this chunky fella, Who Wrestle with God by Jordan Peterson. This is part 2 of that series, focusing on chapter 1 of the book. Man, you can tell I did not sleep well last night. That's crazy. So, okay, next video hopefully better. Chapter 1 of the book is called In the Beginning. Introduction was the last video posted. Pretty in-depth introduction. Not mine. Actually, he called it the foreshadowing section, the still small voice. The official chapter 1 is In the Beginning. So the Bible starts as well. So this book will be dense. This is why we're doing it in chapter summaries versus one large book summary. And it's taken me a long time. I read like 5 pages last night. It took me 30 minutes. So it's just dense. And if you followed the first video, you will know that I feel like this is respectfully not very structured. It feels like almost paragraph by paragraph, and the chapters are subcategorized. I will showcase that here. You can see in the beginning is chapter 1, and then chapter 1.1 is God as creative spirit. You see that? So they're subcategorized. So I'm almost approaching this on a personal level as a subcategorized section. Like, can I just get the understanding of what he means by each subcategory? But oftentimes it's sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and that is rough. So anyway, without further ado, diving right on in to the official chapter 1. Peterson very quickly in this chapter jumps into a section that I highlighted that I think is really nice for getting an idea of the person and how we view the world. It fits in line with the philosophy that he presents, but as with all of this, he's going to expound on it from a religious perspective. So the paragraph, as it's stated, is: how might we, in human terms, understand this first encounter with God? What is he, and what is he confronting? Imagine for a moment what you face when you awaken in the morning. Your attention does not seize on the objects that surround you, on the banal reality of your bedroom furniture. Instead, you ruminate on the challenges and opportunities of the day. Perhaps you feel anxious because there are simply too many things to deal with. Maybe, hopefully, you are in a better situation, and you look forward instead to the opportunities that present themselves. Your consciousness, your being, hovers over the potential offered to you by the new beginning of the morning, in a manner akin to the conditions and process of creation itself, as portrayed in the opening verses of the Bible. A creation that continues with every glance you take and every word you utter. Through consciousness, we process the domain of possible being, of becoming. That is the realm that inspires both hope in our appreciation of positive things ahead, and anxiety in the face of life's dreadful uncertainty. Yeah, I like that, just how we open our day. He goes on later in the next couple paragraphs to say a sentence that I enjoyed, which is: consciousness deals with what could yet realize itself. We wake up the morning, we spring into consciousness, and our first thoughts are often around the future that is there. And it might be subtle. I'm going to go make a coffee. I'm going to read a book. I'm going to get ready. I'm going to use the restroom, have water. But it's a potential future. We start with potential future. We don't typically look at things and be like, oh, that's nice. There's my furniture. There's that. Some of us do, especially if you wake up to a nice sunrise or a good view. But we quickly move to potential for the future. For a lot of people, that's anxiety. And for others, it is hope. And we see what the potential of reality has in store. The summary that I took from that, I wrote down in my own notes, is that each day is creation. We acknowledge the opportunities set before us. We see anxiety or hope. What is yet to come can be brought about by our conscious actions. It's encouraging, and I like encouragement. Each day is creation, akin to the creation of the universe. Again, taking a religious perspective for all of this. He goes on a couple pages later to elaborate on what was started in creation, which, if you've read the book of Genesis, which is a healthy prerequisite for this book, at least the first few chunks of Genesis, He later gets into the book of Jonah at the very end of this book, which I have not read. We'll get there. I've read Jonah. I haven't read this book. There was a sinless garden at the start of creation. And so there was a level of divinity within that garden, the sinlessness, and the people that were in it. This idea of a child of God, which you will still hear used in language in different religious circles today, he specifies here, as an extension of all that we object, deeply offended, if anyone fails to treat us as befits a child of God. That is, if anyone fails to treat us as if we truly matter. We likewise offend if we treat others as if they are beneath us, as if they are anything less than the conscious being of sacred worth upon whose experience reality itself somehow mysteriously depends. Which this is, I think, pretty objectively true when you pay attention to people, whether you're religious or not. You are offended if you are treated as anything less than a child of God. Now, some people say, well, just treat me with respect and dignity. When that's something implicit there is you are worth that. Now, I believe that. I believe it from a religious perspective. Humans are worthwhile because of this book that I believe in. But it does pose a good question for why do people have value? And why do we all react in an offended way when we're treated as anything less than a child of God? That's the point he's making there. He continues on a couple sentences, paragraphs later, that every human being, specifically whatever essence typifies or characterizes every human being, the very spirit that makes them both human and valuable, is directly akin to the force that transforms the void into the heavenly garden itself. All of the most functional and desirable places and states of the world, from the microcosm of happy marriage to the integrated community of nation, are predicated both implicitly and explicitly on something much like this presumption. The takeaway from these sections, for me in my notes, are that people feel when they are treated as less than a valued child of God, and that which converts the void into creation is also present in every human being. So what does that mean? People can take nothing and make it into something. So if God creates the universe, God creates people, and God creates them in his own image, it means to some extent there's an essence of that. Now, we talked in a previous video about there's this removal to some extent. God makes himself a little bit more void and vulnerable, and when he comes in the form of Christ, but also in his creation, there's a removal of something divinely supernatural in people. So, by extension of that logic, there is something less that we will be able to do with our creation, but nonetheless still have it be creation. When you see a beautiful painting, poem, movie, even video games, anything created, even the way that you treat another person, where you create a feeling of love and care and affection, that being a subset of the initial creation. On page 9, he continues to fully elaborate on this creation aspect and the idea of humans not just creating, but being given stewardship. In the Garden of Eden for the fall, there's the initial creation, but then there's also a command for Adam and Eve to steward the land. So they're given work to do before anything else. Well, maybe not before anything else, but there's no sin and they're still asked to work. They're asked to steward and cultivate. And so this passage here is that this is more of an elaboration on what it looks like for us in the modern day, and the desire that people have to often steward and care for their own domain, so to speak. This optimized environment, it is the delicate balance struck between the material world and the social order that best enables each person, more accurately each couple and then family, to demarcate a section of creation for themselves and then to work and sacrifice to make it part of the order that is good or very good. The good or very good is in relation to the words God speaks as he follows through on creation and each day saying things are good, and creates humans and says it's very good. He goes on page 10 to talk about what it looks like to then subdue that creation, to subdue that land that we are to cultivate. To subdue is, therefore, not to control and command, but to put everything in its proper place, to give everything its subordinate value or due, to order everything hierarchically so that the priorities of attention and action can be established, and to place things so that the world is no longer mere potential or disorder. You make the unknown known into the positive. So, if I'm in charge of this room, caring for it, it'll fall to entropy. Eventually, it'll destroy itself if left to nothing. But if I'm told, Ryan, this is your room to take care of and make good, well, now that potential falls on me, the potential for destruction or creation. If I clean it and tidy it up, it looks better. It's subduing it, and not subduing in the sense of taking abusive control over it, but taking control and saying, I'm subduing this and making it fall under my order. And that's healthy. Can this be unhealthy? Yeah, we can all think of examples for that. But the example he gave in marriage and in family, and then by extrapolating more into community, you look at the government officials that you may or may not dislike, or bosses that you don't look up to or like at all. That often comes down to you don't believe that they are cultivating and subduing their domain in a healthy way that is good for that land, and by extension, the people within it. That's why we don't like it. It's simple, but good at the same time. So steward your space well, that it is, in essence, a subsect of a sinless garden. Make it a beautiful dwelling place for God, is the idea there that I would extrapolate from. My personal notes on those 2 pages are as follows. To be fruitful and multiply, and to work the land, is generational. Every man, couple, and family are to till their domain in pursuit of creating cosmic order in that space, as it aligns with and pleases God. And to subdue is to put something in its proper place. I like that languaging. It's not so, we think about it in a beating down way, but it is. Even to subdue an animal in your home, it's saying, we're in charge at home. You're the animal, and you're welcome. Or you're not going to bite my kid. We're going to subdue. So a lot of people have, I think, challenge with some of this wording because of experience and how it's been used and abused. But when stewarded well, these things are actually very beautiful in action. But they might follow a fine line between abusive and protective and caring. And it makes it just very fascinating to think about and consider, really. So, yeah, and I jumped the gun a little bit. I'm talking in chapter 1.2, the spirit of man in the highest place. And now we're heading into chapter 1.3, the real and its representation. I want to read this next section out loud. It's one of the few sections that I actually starred as well as bracketed. We see an analogous situation at higher or more fundamental levels of meaning. Just as there is a calculable probability that a given letter will follow any other given letter, in fact, there is a hierarchy of such probability, in that the letter E, for example, is more likely than A to follow any given consonant, but A is more likely than Q. There is a high and calculable probability that any given phrase, and therefore concept, will co-occur or exist in close proximity to a network of other concepts with associated meaning. That set of proximate conceptions are the so-called symbolic associations that help connote, rather than denote, the meaning of the phrase in question. In a well-constructed story, any given network of such associations is surrounded by other networks of comparative similarity and contrasted with networks of contrasting dissimilarity. So, feels like a lot of word jumble. But the thing that I like about it is there's a predictability to the order of things that we can look at. The note that I made there is that all structures and orders have a likelihood of what will come next. So there's a predictability to certain things. It's likely, if you're hearing me talk right now, that the anticipation, there's a high likelihood that me being in chapter 1.3 will shortly result in me being in chapter 1.4. You'd be safe to guess that. It's just a concept that was interesting for me to read. I read it a couple times, and I've reflected on more since then of how it works both with language and logic and belief. So there's that. So it's a bit of a side note, but interesting. Continuing on from that, predictability is patterns and symbolism. So he talks about the importance of a symbol. You think about, in this case, being a religious book, the symbol of a cross means a lot of things to a lot of people right away. You don't need much explanation. Now, it might mean something different to the person posing the symbol than it does to the rest of the world around them, but regardless, there are immediate implications. Think also about a swastika. Most people will see that and immediately think of the Nazis and think of negativity, and especially if you see that on a flag or on someone's outfit, you're going to make a pretty safe assumption that there's probably some racism, anti-Semitism, hate coming from that person. Now, prior to the actual Nazi movement, that symbol was a really positive one in other parts of the world, in eastern parts of the world, in ancient culture. Now, man, I feel like even they can't get away with that as easily, and especially those in the West that aren't very educated on that symbol, when they see it in Asian countries, have this immediate, like, why do they have a Nazi symbol? It's not for them, but the association with that has been so evil in the Western world that we see it and immediately think evil, which isn't wrong in over 99% of cases in the West. It becomes more interesting in other cultures. But here, and especially if it's got the symbol that has white, black, and red on it, this Third Reich symbol, we're all going to think, like, okay, that's very safe bet that that's a Nazi symbol directly. So point being symbolism, but it carries over into personhood and what people represent. As a therapist, people will look at me sometimes, and maybe being a man, it represents pain that they had. I worked in domestic violence for a while, and some people would not want to work with me because I'm a man, because I'm a symbol of something that brought them pain. It's not for me to be offended by. That makes sense. Other people wanted to work with me because they wanted to change that symbol. And, people are a symbol, whether they want to be or not at times. So, on the point of symbols, they are instead something that brings to consciousness, in word or picture, a host of co-occurring ideas and images, and in that manner fleshes out the relevance, significance, implications, or meaning of what it exists in association with. Someone's pattern of attention and action in the real world can produce the same effect a new person can be someone reminiscent of an old friend, an old enemy, a sister or brother, or even something more fundamental, more archetypal. Something that calls to mind a hero, say, or a villain. People themselves are symbols. It's from pages 13 and 14. My note there is that symbols are not just deep archetypes, but also connections and or representations we have to other things/experiences. So symbols are archetypes of the past. Again, swastika is a great example. It's a link to ancient cultures and symbol of peace, and then was turned into this symbol of the exact opposite of chaos and destruction and hate in the 20th century. So it's archetypal to some extent, but very cultural in what it means. And then there are other symbols of archetypes that are more deeply rooted, light and dark, these yin and yang symbols, black, white, from a thematic element in what they mean to us. Yeah, I love symbolism, so that could be a very long conversation. Ready for another quote? A lot of this is me reacting and dissecting quotes here, but this one I don't think it is another one that I starred and find to be a bit profound. So this is a quick quote from Exodus 20 verse 7. It's one of the 10 commandments, third of those 10 commandments or 10 words. And then he extrapolates. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. The extrapolation is, This is not an injunction against the careless sin of speaking profanely or swearing, as is commonly presumed, but a prohibition against the much more serious error of claiming allegiance to an understanding of the divine order while in fact pursuing only self-serving goals. This is not strictly related to the Bible and belief in God. This is taking a name in vain. The idea here is that you are saying that you believe in something or that you have pledged allegiance to something that you then perform as a traitor to it. If I say I love my wife and then I go on dates with other women, that's not cool. That would be contradictory. If I say I love fitness and I love taking care of my body, and I'm overweight and I'm unhealthy and I never go to the gym, I have not really claimed that in action. Does this make sense? If you say you believe in God, and in specific, if you say you believe in the God in the Bible, and then you don't act in accordance with those commandments, you are a liar and a traitor to that cause. You are taking that name in vain. So the idea here is people who say they're Christians and then do not behave in Christian ways. That's the argument, is that you're taking that name in vain. And I think this is a good thing for a lot of people to think about with any work that you do. If you have a job and you made a commitment to that job, to your family, to your friends, to hobbies, and then you don't do that and you don't live that life, you're contradicting yourself and selling yourself short of what you need to be doing. And maybe that means, hey, this thing you committed to, once it's done, you need to not renew that commitment. Now, oftentimes it probably means you need to step up and follow through, but other times it might be, hey, I committed to soccer and I'm not really putting that much effort in. I say I'm a player, but I do everything I can to not play. I'm not going to do next season. So that's a smaller scale, but when you say you're going to do something, count the cost and mean it. Make it worth it. My note here is to be careful when you say you believe in God, because that statement carries a lot of weight. And if you read the rest of the Bible, people are supposedly, in Judgment Day, judged harder if they said they were Christians, they said they followed Christ, and they didn't, or their actions said otherwise. That they will be judged harsher in some instances than non-believers or lukewarm Christians. But if you say you are something, that actually carries weight. And it's a good thought, but a scary thought. I'll link a video below to a deep dive that Jordan Peterson takes on this exact concept. It's a video called, I believe, Who Dares Say He Believes in God? He kind of takes it to an extreme, in my opinion, where he says, I don't know if I could ever say that because of how big of a deal it is. And he's missing the relational piece. No one can actually do everything the Bible says. That's kind of the point, especially New Testament stuff. Sermon on the Mount alone is impossible. But the idea is you're striving towards this perfection, knowing you'll fall short. It's not about doing it perfectly. It's about saying, I'm going to try my best. And so you can absolutely fall short of that and not really try at all. But the idea of saying, well, I can't ever say I believe in God because I'm going to fail at that, that's, to me, kind of silly. And we do that in everything. I'm going to fail at being a perfect husband and friend. That doesn't mean I'm not committed to it. It just means I know I'm going to fall short, but I'm going to keep trying. So it's an interesting idea, and I think it's an important idea. I'm not going to spend too much time on this next part or read this paragraph in depth, but he goes on to make an argument that anything that is felt by people and experienced in the maybe broader zeitgeist or cultural thing, a lot of us will say this at any given time, like we feel something. It is just as real as if it's not explicitly stated. But the idea of it not being clearly defined means it's in the unconscious. We all unconsciously understand this thing that's happening. We don't have words for it yet. Then that is a real thing, and it's the difference between making the unconscious conscious, and that's the point of discussions and expounding ideas, is to find the words for it. And that's why people will often say like that's it, that's what I was looking for, like you took the words out of my mouth, or like I haven't thought of it that way, you said it like that clicked and it makes sense. So he goes into more of that too, of making the unconscious, conscious. Another thing that's interesting on page 18, it's two brief sections back to back, where he's talking about, again, the conscious and unconscious and the actions within reality of how we behave around certain things. Thus, even when God is dead, he maintains his existence not only in the depths, but in the patterned order of being and becoming itself. The validity of a given worldview is therefore anything but arbitrary. Instead, it is dependent on, or mirrors, the accuracy with which it reflects the natural, social, psychological world. The notes that I took from that in the broader section there is that the acknowledgement or not of something has no effect on its reality or effect on us. It either exists or it does not. Belief or worldview has to reconcile with existence and the world around it. So those two takeaways are, just because you don't acknowledge or recognize something, it does not play any effect on whether or not it's real. It is real whether you acknowledge it or not. If somebody in the room next door was passed out and I said, I didn't know, it still happened, and it's still happening. If I knew it, then I would act differently in accordance with understanding reality and truth. I would be stopping this and going over to help. I don't know that to be true, so there's no action related to it, but the reality of the situation would change none. It wouldn't change at all. And also that any worldview that you have only works if it can reconcile reality. Are there always going to be some question marks and difficulties? Yes, but you have to be able to back up your worldview with how the world actually works. It's a big part of it. And all of you thinking and watching right now are probably like, well, I can think of an example of that worldview that I don't like and how it can't answer this question. I would argue most worldviews can't answer certain questions, or they struggle to. And I think this is the idea of this felt feeling and bringing the unconscious to conscious existence, is when something doesn't match, then we are faced with changing our worldview, changing ourselves at times, or diving deeper into understanding. So if I believe in a certain worldview, and it works 90% of the time, but I find occasional points where it's hard to reconcile, a good place to start is that I just don't understand enough. Because the thought that I am smarter than anyone who's ever existed on this topic is, that's a very, very low chance, isn't it? So we start with investigation and move from there. Can I make sense of my worldview as it relates to this situation? A really common one in Christianity and Judaism is what C.S. Lewis called the problem of pain, which is, why do bad things happen? Why do people experience pain? Why does that good person get cancer? Why does this tsunami hit this town? What type of God would do that? So it's a reconciliation thing. And you have to decide, does that now destroy my belief, or is there more nuance and reconciling involved with that? So just more food for thought. Moving into chapter 1.4, Eve from Adam. Now, I'm going to read this paragraph. I don't have a lot of opinions on it, but I do think it's interesting and want to present it with my limited thoughts on it after. It is to bring about this mutual improvement that Eve is created, in a state of fundamental equality and partnership, and in particular created from Adam's rib from his side, not from his head, as Athena sprang from Zeus, which would imply a potential superiority, not from his leg, foot, or other lower bodily part, which would imply subordination or inferiority. Eve corresponds to Adam precisely as the Taoist yin does to yang. It is her job to bring to her partner's attention all the concerns that Adam may have overlooked, involved as he is in the enterprise of responsible stewardship. My takeaway is that a helpmeet, Eve, taken from the middle of Adam, his rib, implies neither superiority or inferiority, and is there to notice and assist in blind spots, not to be subservient. There are a lot of opinions on the egalitarian and what's the word? Well, I'm blanking. Biblical idea of marriage and position of man and woman, which I'm not going to get into with this video, but I like this initial take that it's taken in the creation story, Eve is taken from this central place from Adam as a partnership, this side stance of she's also there to call out his blind spots, and that they are together to assist each other in building and pursuing this proper order of the world around them. To move further on that same exact point on page 25, Peterson at this point has talked a little bit about what we've all heard with Eve eating from the garden, but he goes on to say that Adam is no better, that he can categorize and order the world, but he can also falsely claim expertise in doing so and ability outside his actual level of competence, and is very likely to do that to impress the eternal feminine. This is the boastful narcissism that characterizes the false masculine, indicated in characters such as Gaston in Disney's Beauty and the Beast. Or, for more seriously in the case of the so-called dark triad or tetrad of pathological personality traits. So, claiming false expertise and showing boastful narcissism, often in pursuit of the feminine, is a form of false masculinity. So that the often masculine temptation there will be to just kind of BS your way through something. And I appreciate the equal calling out there, because we all have our shortcomings with that, and so from this perspective, it is just an interesting set of thoughts. And heading into the final push of Chapter 1, the final section, Chapter 1.5, in God's Image. And it circles us back to facing the day, the personal daily creation that dawns on us every time we wake. Again, reading directly from his work, page 30 and 31. Consider once again what makes itself manifest in the theater of your consciousness, when the new day dawns, the promise and peril of the next 16 wakeful hours, the, as of yet, unshaped future. The unfolding present is neither determined nor even constrained, ultimately by the past, not in any simple and predictable sense, as even the most previously stable, predictable trajectory can transform in a heartbeat and turn on a dime. Consequently, we cannot apply a set of deterministic rules and make our way forward, even in principle. No algorithm allows us to unerringly compute the transforming horizon of the future, not in a world that is not, even in principle, deterministic. We are called on, instead, to meet the eternal challenge of shaping, in accordance with our vision, however immature that vision may be, that which is not yet is, but could yet be. We are oriented in the world toward becoming, toward what is changing and what can be changed, while everything static and fixed is rendered irrelevant and invisible, even to perception itself. And my takeaway from that is that the day is not predetermined, even with the past in perspective and understood. There is still unknown to be lived. Life can change in an instant. Our eternal yet daily challenge is in becoming and shaping the world around us towards growth and goodness. He then goes on to elaborate a little bit more on human rights, these inalienable rights. And I'm going to read a paragraph and then a section of a paragraph on the following page, pages 32 and 33, as he goes into these rights of people and these things that we hold inherent in ourselves. These rights and responsibilities are not bestowed upon us secondarily by some process of social contract, not granted to us by the omniscient, omnipresent, and all-powerful state. They are instead the deepest reflection of what gives rise to the enduring state, and which protects it from its otherwise inevitable decline into anachronism, blindness, gigantism, and tyranny. Those rights and responsibilities are there in the beginning, like the Logos, which is their true source. They are axiomatic, the true foundation of everything, including any possible state that could possibly establish any rights whatsoever, or deny them. The spirit that mediates becoming and being is therefore there in the beginning, present in the present, shaping the future and residing within or even characterizing us, if we will only allow that. The genuine leader, therefore, necessarily gazes into the abyss, into the suffering of his or her constituents, discovers the once great heroes of the past languishing in the underworld, identifies, rescues, and rejuvenates the eternally dying Father, integrating the past with the present, and gives new life and vision to what has been established before. Even to maintain and propagate itself, the state must therefore subjugate itself to the logos of the individual. We all believe we have inalienable rights, and that these are individual, and that a good leader and a good state encourages the individual to actualize themselves, not to actualize the group, but as the individual actualizes, then we see actualization of the group. That's my extrapolation. Further detail note that I have is that rights and responsibilities are indwelt in man from the start, his start in the start of creation, the push of what's internal, the being, the soul, towards the fulfillment of these rights and responsibilities is in all of us. Societal success and the success of a leader is built on encouraging individuals to act in accordance with their pursuit, their divine aim. The leader also sees the suffering in others and helps guide them out and into their rightful position. So, the last couple of thoughts here. Again, reading from his text directly for the last time. To say it another way, the heartfelt opposition to compulsion and force, as well as the weak or hedonistic and immature irresponsibility that enables compulsion and force, even in its merely felt or inchoately sensed, the feeling, for example, of violation produced by conscience, is faith, at least in the alternative to tyranny or slavery. My final note. All men are opposed to tyranny and slavery of self, to compulsion and force. The author argues that we are opposed to this in others as well. I actually disagree. In my short life, I have watched people who argue for freedom, while at the same time making their stance known on taking freedom from others. I've seen the vitriol that comes from people from discussions on abortions and vaccinations, topics from modern slavery and making our clothes, to hatred towards Israelis and Palestinians. The question to me is where holistic empathy comes in. I believe that to come from a deeper openness and alignment with Christ and his principles. Again, my philosophy there. Why are some evildoers' consciousness clean? Because a dead body can't feel crushing weight, nor a dead soul feel evil. It's not my quote, that is a quote on consciousness there at the end that I appreciate from a name that I at the moment do not remember. So 40-minute video in for one chapter, so expect more of this type of intensity from this book. I'm going to go ahead and hit the pause button there. Well, there's nothing really to pause. That is the end of that section and the end of my notes for it. So thank you for joining. If you are interested in more of this, there are 7 more videos coming out for the rest of the book over the next couple weeks, ideally. I'm always open to suggestions for how the structure works. If you have any polite recommendations to make this more engaging, I'm up for it. But also, this is, again, a space for me to reflect on these things and to hopefully elicit some thoughts. Not really trying to push any ideas. It's just reviewing a book of which I do not necessarily 100% agree with, nor will I for any book that we do here. It's all just thoughts and elaboration, and anyone who wants to join can do just that. So with that, I will look forward to seeing you all for Chapter 2 of We Who Wrestle with God.